Have you ever met someone who seemed to know what you were about to say before you even opened your mouth? They noticed the tiny pause before your answer, the glance toward the exit, the forced smile that lasted half a second too long. And somehow, they understood more about you than people who had known you for years. Here's the strange part. Psychology suggests that much of human communication isn't spoken at all. Researchers studying nonverbal behavior have long found that facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, and context carry enormous amounts of social information, often outside conscious awareness. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. What if someone has been quietly reading you this entire time, while you never realized you were giving away so much? Most people believe mind readers are born with a mysterious gift. They're not. What looks like intuition is often a collection of mental habits, observation skills, and pattern recognition that almost anyone can develop, but very few ever do. By the end of this video, you'll understand why certain people seem impossible to fool, what your brain is secretly revealing every day, and how to sharpen your own ability to understand people without becoming manipulative. Because the biggest clue isn't what people say, it's what your brain never notices. The truth they never told you: most people think reading others is about spotting obvious body language. Crossed arms means someone is defensive. Looking away means they're lying. A smile means they're happy, simple, convenient, and mostly wrong. Human behavior doesn't work like a dictionary where every movement has one fixed meaning. Psychologists have spent decades warning against oversimplifying body language because context changes everything. The real problem isn't that people hide their emotions. It's that our brains desperately want quick answers. Your brain is a prediction machine. Every second, it's trying to answer questions before they're fully formed. Can I trust this person? Are they dangerous? Do they like me? Should I stay? Should I leave? To save energy, your brain creates shortcuts. Neuroscientists call many of these mental shortcuts heuristics. They're incredibly useful, but they also make you miss what's actually happening. Imagine meeting someone who reminds you of an old friend. Without realizing it, your brain starts filling in missing information. You assume they're kind, honest, reliable. Not because they've earned your trust, because your brain hates uncertainty. Meanwhile, someone who quietly reads people does almost the opposite. Instead of rushing to conclusions, they collect tiny pieces of evidence. A hesitation, a change in breathing, a delayed response. The words someone chooses, the words they carefully avoid. None of these signals prove anything alone. But together, they begin forming a pattern. That's exactly how detectives interview suspects, how experienced therapists understand clients, how skilled negotiators know when someone is holding something back. They're not reading minds, they're reading patterns. Behavioral scientists often describe human behavior as clusters rather than isolated actions. One nervous gesture means very little. 5 related behaviors appearing together? Now your brain has something meaningful to analyze. But here's what most people never realize. The best observers aren't constantly watching other people. They're constantly controlling their own assumptions. Every assumption is treated like a hypothesis, not a fact. Instead of saying, "They're lying," they silently ask, "What else could explain this? Maybe they're anxious. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're uncomfortable. Maybe they're simply thinking carefully." This tiny mental habit changes everything, because once you stop judging and start observing, people begin revealing themselves naturally. Ironically, trying too hard to read someone often blinds you. Real observers are patient, curious, calm. They're willing to wait for enough evidence before reaching conclusions. And while everyone else is reacting emotionally, they're quietly collecting information. That's why they often seem uncannily accurate. Not because they know secrets, because they notice details everyone else ignores. And here's where it gets really dark. Picture this happening inside your skull right now. Millions of neurons are firing every second. Your senses are collecting an overwhelming flood of information. The texture of your clothes, the sound around you, tiny changes in light, background conversations, your heartbeat, the feeling of your feet touching the floor. If your conscious mind processed every detail, you'd become overwhelmed almost instantly. So your brain filters, aggressively. The reticular activating system, often called the brain's attention filter, helps decide what reaches your conscious awareness and what quietly disappears into the background. That's incredibly efficient. But efficiency comes with a price. You only notice what your brain believes is important. Now imagine two people walking into the same room. One notices the furniture. The other notices facial expressions. Neither is seeing more reality. They're simply paying attention to different parts of it. People who seem exceptionally good at reading others have often trained their attention differently. Instead of focusing only on words, they notice relationships between behaviors. Someone laughs, but their shoulders remain tense. Someone agrees immediately, but pauses just long enough beforehand to suggest hesitation. Someone maintains eye contact, yet repeatedly tightens their jaw. None of these clues stand alone. They're pieces of a puzzle. Your prefrontal cortex, the area heavily involved in planning, reasoning, and evaluating information, helps compare those pieces instead of jumping to conclusions. But here's the problem. Stress weakens this process. When you're anxious, angry, excited, or afraid, your brain shifts toward fast survival thinking. The emotional centers of the brain become more dominant. Instead of observing carefully, you react automatically. That's why arguments escalate. That's why first impressions become permanent. That's why misunderstandings multiply. Emotion narrows attention. Curiosity expands it. There's another fascinating concept psychologists study called emotional contagion. Human emotions spread surprisingly easily. Walk into a room full of nervous people, and your own body often becomes slightly more tense. Spend time around someone calm. Your breathing gradually slows. Most people experience these emotional shifts without noticing them. Highly observant people often notice both. They recognize the other person's emotional state, and they recognize their own emotional reaction. That creates an enormous advantage, because once you separate your feelings from someone else's, you stop confusing intuition with projection. This is where many people make a critical mistake. They assume they're reading another person, when in reality, they're reading themselves, their own fears, their own expectations, their own insecurities. True social intelligence isn't about seeing through everyone else. It's about seeing through yourself first. The quieter your internal noise becomes, the louder other people's genuine signals become. It's almost like cleaning a dirty window. The world didn't suddenly become clearer. The glass did. And once your brain learns to slow down, observe patterns, question assumptions, and stay emotionally balanced, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop trying to predict people. You start understanding them. So if your brain is already this wired against you, what can actually change it? That answer is both simpler and more surprising than anything you've heard before.